I'm your host, Ryder Todd Smith, and today we're joined by John Holtzman, founding partner of the Renne Public Law Group. John, welcome to the PCEO Report.
Well, thanks for having me.
Of course, good to have you. All right, what the heck is Renne Public Law Group? What do you guys do?
Well, we are a public sector law firm representing primarily local governments, counties, cities, and special districts throughout California.
And they make up 95% of your portfolio of work, or I get the sense you're pretty much exclusively focused on public agencies and local governments in California.
Yeah, the exception is we do represent a few nonprofits, but who work essentially in a similar space.
All right. So I guess that's a little bit of a distinction for your firm you've built up. And how many attorneys do you have there at the firm?
About 25.
So 25 attorneys focused primarily on local government, a little bit of nonprofit, and which means you've eschewed kind of corporate work. Is that baked into the DNA, and what's the root of that?
Yeah, well, it's very much baked into the DNA. We started the firm, Louise Renne and I started this firm. Louise had been the city attorney of San Francisco for 16 years, and I was her chief deputy. And so we really started the firm with the idea that we would do a lot of what we did in the city attorney's office in San Francisco, but do it for cities and counties, et cetera, throughout the state. So yeah, it's very much baked into our DNA. It's what the mission of the firm is. I always say we're different from other private sector firms who serve government, local government, because we came really directly out of government. And so we view ourselves as really a firm that not only is devoted to our individual clients, but to the broader mission of local government.
Well, and that's interesting. There's a few, at least you're an alum of the San Francisco Attorney's Office, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And obviously Louise is as well.
Yes, we have actually, I think we have 5 or 6 lawyers who are alums of the office. Linda Ross is an alum of the office as well. Art Hartinger as well, and Mariam Morley. So yeah, we have Amy Ackerman, at least 6, I guess, attorneys who came out of the San Francisco city attorney's office.
Well, and kind of interesting too, because that city attorney's office serves San Francisco, which is the only county city, both in the state of California, which means you got exposure to county level activities and issues and city level activities and issues, right?
Yeah, the irony is, I'm from New York, and so I didn't know much about the structure of government in California when I first started in the city attorney's office, and didn't realize how unique San Francisco really is. It is more appropriately kind of viewed as a county council office than really a city attorney office because of the breadth of activity. And I didn't even realize until after I left the city attorney's office in 2002 that there was this very sharp distinction in California between what cities do and what counties do.
But you know it now because you work with a bunch of cities as well, primarily in the Northern California area, but a few in Southern California too.
Yes, so we're all over the state. We're still stronger, I think, in Northern California than we are in Southern California, but we do work for LA. We've done work for San Diego, and a lot of other cities in Southern California. So yeah, we're all over.
No. And you said you came from New York. So where'd you go to law school? How'd you end up in California? Give me a little background on the story of John and entering this niche world of local government law.
Yeah, so it wasn't my real intention to do this. That's probably true for almost anybody who we're talking to right now.
Yeah.
I ended up in California because I got into Stanford Law School, and I thought it would be fun to come and visit California. I'd heard about it in songs and music and whatever, and on TV and et cetera. And I thought it sounded like a pretty neat place. So so I came out here in 1978 to go to Stanford, and really I never thought that I was going to stay in California at all. I had been very involved in federal government issues throughout. Really, like I started actually in politics when I was 14, and I'd been involved. I ran the down Manhattan McGovern campaign when I was 16. And during law school, I worked for Clark Clifford and Paul Warnke, and I worked for the Center for Law and Social Policy. I worked in Congress during college. So I thought I was a federal government guy. And honestly, going to Stanford at the time, I think there was a perception, and you have to transport yourself back in time to think about this a little bit, because views of federal government have changed so much over time.
Fair enough.
If you come out of kind of the Kennedy era, and obviously I'm a little younger than that, but coming out of the Kennedy era, the discussion was that federal government was sort of for the best and the brightest. I mean, I know how that sounds right now, but that was the thought, that if you're going to go to a high-level job in the federal government, that was a very honorable thing to do. And from the standpoint of the folks at Stanford Law School, that was, if you were going to do government at all, it was, that would be the acceptable alternative. The challenge for me was I was out in California. There isn't really much in the way of federal government in California. I ended up clerking for the California Supreme Court for Justice Otto Kaus for 2 years. So then I was out here for another couple of years, worked for Morrison and Foerster, private sector, big downtown for a while as well. And at that point, I was pretty committed to California. So I was lucky. I mean, so much of life is luck, I guess. And, I met Louise Renne. Louise Renne had just become the city attorney of San Francisco. She was appointed at the time, and then ultimately she was elected to 3 more terms. And I was the head of what's called the Barristers Club, and I was giving a speech. She was giving a speech, and she said, "Hey, how would you like to come and be part of my sort of core team, rebuilding the city attorney's office?" At the time, the city attorney's office did not have San Francisco city attorney's office didn't have a great reputation, and so it was the equivalent of sort of career suicide. So I thought, great, perfect. So
if you're going to commit career suicide, do it at a young age.
Yeah. So
you can still recover.
Yes, and so at the ripe old age of 29, I became her special assistant. Ultimately, became chief deputy city attorney, and so it was just it was really luck to get in on the ground floor of a place that right now I would probably have trouble getting hired at a low level. And then we had this incredible experience for 15 years of building that office into what I would assert at least is probably the top public law office in the United States for local government. And so that was it was really, there was a lot of luck involved in that. Part of it was, though, that we realized there was this tremendous untapped reserve of people who didn't want to go to big firms, who wanted to do the public good, and that there was this untapped idea that local government actually isn't just as kind of gritty and grimy or whatever as maybe folks thought, that really local government posed the opportunity to get stuff done, to develop policy, to do things that we always thought the federal government was going to be the leader in. And of course, what really happened during this era was that the federal government ceased to be much of a leader in policy development. And so what really happened in a lot of ways is local government became, a good bit more popular.
Mm-hmm. So particularly, I suppose, in activist cities, counties like San Francisco, where there was, and frankly, also lots of policy challenges to take on that were more bleeding edge than you might see in some rural areas and suburbs and whatnot.
Right.
Well, that's interesting. So this mentality of kind of build a practice focused on the public interest with excellent talent. I assume that's what transcended into the creation and formation of RPLG.
Yeah. So really, our intention when we started RPLG originally was really to just bring one of the things we did in the city attorney's office was we were able to get folks who were, top people in private sector law to come and work with us. So these are people, top graduates of law schools, who were really, really, excellent lawyers. And that was something that was somewhat new to public law at the time, I think, to be able to really get the top talent. So really our focus was to do much the same thing with RPLG, to, really get top talent and really do cutting edge work. I think there had always been, and maybe there still is, a little bit of a bias that cities and counties would use sort of the traditional public sector law players for their routine work, and then if they had a really big hot issue, they would go to a Morrison and Forster or Howard Rice or one of the sort of high end firms and pay 3 times, 4 times what they were paying, for more typical representation. And our goal was really to sort of capture that market, to capture the cases that were, that were going, or might otherwise go to private sector firms which didn't really even know public law. I mean, and so the irony is you're going to those firms, they have to learn everything from the beginning. But there was always, and maybe this is true in life in general, but there was always, I think, the view that, the folks who are most accessible are probably the least good. And so there was always a sort of flight to the bigger firms for the big cases.
So, so you're focused on this particular niche of kind of bringing the best of the attorneys and filling this area or going after this particular market, which isn't to the exclusion, I think, of doing general practice law for cities as well and other ongoing work. But I am curious, why does, if a young attorney or a young law student is listening to this conversation right now, like, what's their trade-off? Why do they choose to come work at your firm versus stick with the big corporate firm or some such thing? Well,
a lot of people are very disenchanted with big corporate law. I mean, number one, the hours are just soul crushing. And although we do not view ourselves as a lifestyle firm, and I get very upset when anybody talks about that. Fact of the matter is, people don't have to work the soul crushing hours that they have to work in firms. They're paid less than they would be in a private sector firm that serves private sector clients, because our rates are obviously less than half of what downtown rates are, but they're paid more than they would be paid if they went into, say, a pure public interest job or most government jobs. It's not true 100%, but so it's a happy, or at least I hope, a happy medium between a life of toil, the other thing about it is structurally those firms are very hierarchical. They're quite old-fashioned. They're not what we strive to create in an environment. Obviously, being a boutique firm, they're not driven by a mission. And I find personally, I mean, sure, there are a lot of people in the world who are driven, largely by money, and they're probably not the people we're going to get. But there are a surprising number of law school graduates who are really out there, to do good things, to make change, to help people. And, so we're really very well positioned in a lot of respects to do that. And that's the group that we try to bring into the profession and into the firm.
I've learned that in life it's good to have choice. And for the law school graduates and attorneys out there, they have different opportunities to go to work for different law firms. And it sounds like RPLG is providing a different niche to go after or a place to work and fulfill a kind of mission-driven purpose while still making enough money to put some Cheerios on the table and drive a car and own a house and things like that. So it's good to have options in life is, I guess, my point on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And again, it's not for everybody. We are looking for people who see public law as kind of a calling, and so that's not everybody. It isn't everybody. But I also find, and I'm sure you do too, because I know how devoted you are to bringing people into the public space, that the work is just a ton more interesting than people realize, and a ton more positive than people realize. I think when people look at government and they think of all the problems of government, which really, government has a lot of problems.
Yep.
I'm not sure private sector doesn't either. I don't know enough about it to know. But when they see that, I don't think they realize that one of the greatest things about local government, and this sounds cliche, is, you as an individual can make a tremendous difference. I mean, you can, when I look back on my career and how, I've been involved in, many cutting edge efforts that have gone national, these are things that I can feel personally proud about having worked on.
Yeah. Well, and I think I certainly sense that mission in some of the young people, well, many of the young people we bring in too. I'm not sure they fully appreciate and understand what all of local government really means. But the idea of making an impact on communities and helping people is something that is attractive to the folks that come work here. And, I would say the same thing for a lot of the folks I talk to at MMASC or NC or the city manager people I know. Like, there are very few of them who were 16 years old and said, I am going to be a city manager. Right?
Yeah.
But they found themselves doing public service work and enjoying it and getting their hands dirty in a community and trying to solve problems on the ground. And they stuck around for a while. And they were competent and capable and ethical. And next thing you know, they're an ACM and then a city manager, and they're, doing the big seat job. So it's an interesting space, right? I think it's a space where if you fall into it, as many people do, as you noted, you tend to stick when you fall into it. It's a deeper pit. So,
I think it's also, it's a question of whether you really want to enjoy your career. And I mean, this is fun stuff.
So, John, you built this successful firm. It sounds like you're in a great niche, and you're looking for a particular type of talent. But I assume, does this mean you're kind of constantly on the recruiting path and trying to bring in new talent?
Absolutely. The biggest challenge that the firm faces is finding people and educating people about the opportunities of public law, and that's something that we have to work at really every day. I think one of the hard things about it is we tend to, all of us in public sector tend to throw people in at the deep end, and that can be a very daunting challenge. It's also, though, a great opportunity for folks coming into the profession to get a lot of responsibility, very, very early in their careers. We often will hire somebody who's been in a private sector firm doing private sector work for 5 years and never taken a deposition, and they're shocked that the second day they're here, they're taking a deposition. So that's one of the great opportunities of working in public law. It's also, we have lawyers here, like Jeff Spellberg, for example, who have over 100 civil jury trials. You just don't find people in, at Morrison and Forster, big august law firm, the big partners probably had 10 civil jury trials in their careers. So, and those guys were 60 years old, so that's an opportunity in public sector that just does not exist elsewhere.
Yeah, that's certainly unique. And I think the exposure, the depth of the experience, in my experience at Tripepi Smith, when we, in my day job, when I'm not doing public CEO, when we're recruiting young talent, bringing into the local government sector, yes, they get thrown in the deep end. They get exposed to experienced principals on our team that have been around the block a few times in crisis situations, for example, or social media issues. And so the learning curve is super steep, but very powerful. And if you're intellectually curious and capable, it's a phenomenal process to go through.
Yeah, and I look at myself. I was running the city's labor and employment, San Francisco's labor and employment world when I was 29 years old.
Yeah, that's young. And you probably learned a lot, right?
I learned a lot. I have to say, in fairness, I think I learned how to do it when I was about 35. Yeah, there is a downside to being thrown into the deep end.
Well, the key thing is, I assume, is you have major partners at the firm that provides a good oversight to the Utes, so to speak.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things about this firm that is really unusual is we have a lot of people who have really 30 plus years of experience in public sector. And, that's a tremendous luxury to practice with people like that. And to have somebody you can go to who can give you the answer, in 2 minutes as opposed to 8 hours. The weird thing about our world is, if you have to research it, if you have to really understand it, it can take days of research. If you have somebody who's really senior, I'll give you an example like Linda Ross. So Linda Ross was in the city attorney's office at the same time I was. She was head of the labor employment team after me. She then was head of public protection team, which is police, et cetera. And then she was the mayor's lawyer, the mayor being Gavin Newsom, for 8 years. And so, Linda, simply knows a lot. And if you call Linda, my joke as a guy who runs a firm is, what do you do with in a system where you get paid by the hour with people who can write a brief in 2 hours? Yeah, that's supposed to take a week.
Right.
But truly, it's an incredible pleasure to work with folks who just know the law.
You, it's going back to this experience of bringing in younger folks into the profession. RPLG runs a fellowship program. Could you talk a little bit about the fellowship program?
Yeah, this is something we're very, very excited about. This is about our 5th year running it. So this is a program for law students, typically, although we bring in some public policy students as well. And it's a 2-week program in which we expose folks to some of the thought leaders in local public sector. And the concept behind the program is to show people, particularly people who I think are viewing their career as in some way public service oriented. More typically they're thinking public interest oriented, to show them all the great things that government does, all the really important and intellectually difficult issues that government is working with, and most importantly, the quality of people who are in government. Because that's the unknown thing about for a lot of people about government. I think if you don't know government, if you don't know local government, you probably naturally assume it's filled with a bunch of bureaucrats who aren't that thoughtful. And the fact of the matter is, anybody who knows the city managers, for example, will tell you, these are some of the most thoughtful people you could ever run into. And so we bring in, city managers, we bring in city attorneys, we bring in folks who do, homeless issues, fire issues, police reform issues, all of these kinds of issues, to show them all of these issues that are percolating in local government, and the incredible minds that we have on those issues in local government. And then the hope is that they will choose a career, in local government. We have a few of them who've come to the firm itself. It is not designed primarily as a recruitment tool for the firm. It's really designed as a recruitment tool to bring lawyers, top quality lawyers, into, the general local government sphere.
Right. So it's kind of a method for giving back to the industry at large.
It is. And, I hate to say it, but it's also a lot of fun because it gives us, for a couple of weeks, the opportunity to look back and not look at things in a purely legal lens, but to be looking at the relationship of how does local government get something done, important things, difficult issues, and how that relates to the law practice.
Yeah. So, and speaking of not really looking at through a purely legal lens, RPLG has expanded kind of its lines of services. You have other divisions, right? So you have a public policy group, right, RPPG, and then a management group, right, RPMG. Can you what's up with that? Why do you have these other divisions? This is, not all law firms do this. What makes you guys special, and what's the point of having those three different divisions between legal, management, and I guess effectively lobbying?
Lobbying, yeah. So, and by the way, the lobbying is all on behalf of local government. We don't do private sector lobbying, and we also only lobby in Sacramento. We don't lobby our clients. So the concept underlying it, I guess, comes from a strongly held belief that the issue that you hire lawyers for is to solve problems. And a lot of times, sadly, the problems we're solving, particularly in our litigation team, are problems that have already occurred, and bad things may have happened, or at least things that got us sued. There are, in many ways, we really actually have four divisions, and the idea is how to advance the ball in any given situation can be different. So the core of the idea is really that lawyers are not everything.
It's big of you to say.
Yeah. Well, I'm just, there's a reason why, and we could talk about this later, why we hire a lot of people who are recent undergrads who've, and you do too, for that matter, is they're very bright, they're very curious, and heck, they can have a lot of ideas that lawyers that are as good or better than very well trained lawyers can have. So part of the idea is that lawyers are not the only solution, but part of the idea is that a lot of the problems that present as legal issues may not be really legal issues. They could be, let's take the management group, which is essentially a consulting group. We do training for city managers, we do evaluations, we do everything from classification studies to just consulting on how do you make this organization run better or whatever. Very often that's what a local government needs. They don't really need a lawyer. They may need a lawyer to get them out of the particular dilemma that they're in. But particularly in the era of, we've had with the baby boomers retiring, there's been a little bit of a shortage of talent, coming up. There's a lot of great people coming up, but there's still a lot of holes, to fill. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that there are different ways of achieving your goal. One of your ways of achieving a goal is to get, an excellent former city manager, a Nelson Fialo, et cetera, to come in and figure out how to solve this problem, or a top HR person or whatever. Another way of solving your problem might be legislative, as in state legislature. So much of what local governments suffer from is legislation from Sacramento right now. I'd like to say that that a lot of what our lobbying group does is create new legislation for cities, and they do. But a lot of what we also do is try to stop bad legislation,
Right.
and
A lot of
so,
defense.
or make the legislation, more user friendly, right? So that it's achievable, so that you can actually work with it, and so that's why we felt the lobbying group was really important. And then the final piece, which we don't really talk that much about, is we do affirmative litigation on behalf of cities and counties, meaning that we sue. For example, we sued the opioid manufacturers, we sued Juul, for public health harms, or it's not always public health, it could be consumer harms or other things, because that's another way that we can, that local governments can accomplish their goals. So the broader point is you want to have all the tools. And the other point of it is, I think, having spent, because I worked on, a lot of things like bankruptcy and pension reform that require a lot of consultants. One of the things I have learned is that consulting alone doesn't necessarily get you there. What you need is not just the consulting, but the tools to accomplish what your consultant is going to tell you need to do. So just having a book that sits on the shelf of the study that says and we all know this happens all the time, and isn't enough. It's what you want is the consultant working with the lawyers saying, okay, how do we achieve this? So a lot of what I work in is obviously labor and employment. Labor tends to be a major impediment to achieving reforms, change, improvements, efficiencies, all of those sorts of things. So it isn't very helpful to come up with a study that says, if there wasn't labor issues, we could do X. And it's like, great. Our job is to then put that together and say, well, what's a workable plan? How do we make it effective? So that's a lot of why we have the other groups.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what's keeping you up at night when you think about the legal issues affecting the local government world, John? What's looming out there on the horizon, or what are the big things you've been kind of noodling through? Obviously, I'm not looking to pry into existing client cases or things like that, but from your legal perspective, what's going on in the local government world that you chew on?
Well, spent a lot of time chewing on a number of issues. I guess, first of all, the broadest issue that faces local government right now is what is our relationship to state government and regional government. Obviously the housing issue has placed that, absolutely squarely at the center.
Yeah.
We are effectively in the process of redefining that relationship, whether we admit it or not. I think, I am very much a local government guy, a local power guy. But I recognize also there are such a thing as regional issues. I mean, I always say to people, look, talk about transportation, where's it going to, right? I mean,
yeah.
in most cases, it's going someplace outside of, whatever your local, so there are, the reality is there are issues that are statewide, or that I think more importantly are regional. The state is almost too big to have statewide issues. It does have some statewide issues, but a lot of the issues are regional. So a lot of what keeps me up at night, as we have this brewing. Local government has always been very popular relative to other governments. I mean,
more trusted.
Yeah, I mean, government's never popular, but by comparison to all other governments, local government has been generally much more popular. All of, particularly the housing issues, but some of the other issues as well, are beginning to drive a wedge there, because people are beginning to feel their local government doesn't represent them, and this is a very, I think it's a very troubling movement, and that I don't know where it's all going to go. And I also I have to admit, really the answer, which is to say, sure, maybe we get a ballot measure that says, well, everything's local again, and that's going to satisfy some people. But we do have these real problems we need to solve too. So I'm not as much as I used to be in the sort of reflexive, local government is absolutely everything. There are these problems we need to solve, and a good example of this is look at homelessness. We're not going to solve homelessness at the local level. I don't care what you say. You need state, you need federal. You need everything here. So on the one hand, if you can't on the one hand say everything's local and then say, oh, yes, but we need the state and federal government to solve this problem. So I think you have to take a nuanced view of this issue. But so that is number one. Number two, of course, I live in San Francisco, which, has been, I know nobody knows about this well-kept secret, but we've had some problems recently. Yeah. But the problems are, they are very concentrated in San Francisco, but they are common across the state. Homelessness, crime, et cetera. And I think, we're in a position where these are very, very challenging issues, and we don't have a lot of great answers to these issues yet. So I think these are, to me, figuring out how do we address these issues is huge. But then, there are other issues too. I do a lot of work in the fire prevention space, and I represent some fire districts and that are very active in the area of fire prevention. And, I look at, we think that we are in favor of preventing fires. But in reality, when we look at what's happening on the ground, there is tremendous resistance to regulation and enforcement that is what's necessary to actually achieve those results. And there are these large swaths of land that are owned by parks districts and other things that don't really want to play ball because they've got their own ideas about where they want to spend their money. I think we really lack a coherent approach to actually achieving. We're all saying the right things. I mean, you won't find a person who isn't saying they're in favor of fire prevention.
Except for arsonists, yes.
Yeah, right. But when it comes down to achieving those goals, we are, in some ways, we may even be moving away from them.
Well, I guess I would just observe this is the amalgamation of all the challenges you're talking about. There's all this pressure on local agencies to create housing. More and more housing is going where the land is cheaper, which puts them in what's called the wildland urban interface, or puts them out near the forests and near more rural areas where fires are more common. There's more material to burn. And guess what happens? You get more houses that catch fire. You get more structure fires. You get more exposure to the risk, right? And then so there's kind of this dichotomous approach to policy. On the one hand, saying you got to build more housing. And on the other hand, it's like, well, I'm going to build the housing where there's more fire risk, and the state doesn't necessarily care about that risk. They, at least from a, say a housing mandate side on density and creating units. And then you get the third layer comes in, which is the insurance companies who are like, wait a minute, we can't cover these insurance risks anymore, right? The fire risk is too high. So now the state becomes the insurer of last resort, and that has all sorts of other kind of interesting implications for the market. It's a real amalgamation of kind of economics, policy objectives, government working against government that makes for, kind of a confounding circumstance. And I find frustrating to kind of watch it unfold. But you clearly, especially with your fire district clients, you must be on the front lines of some of those issues.
We are. And actually, one of the chiefs that I work with is one of the leaders in fire modeling and fire prevention, thinking. And so he is working primarily now with the Hoover Institution and so a lot of other folks around the state and even some legislators on how do we improve the modeling so that insurance pricing is driven by actual conditions on the ground. Because to the extent that we could do that, where we could price risk in an appropriate way, and just right now, that pricing is not in any way localized. It's not really, I mean, it is localized, but it's not localized at a level that you, as a person who owns property, could affect your risk profile.
Right.
To get it down to that local level, and it's not that hard with more modern technology to be able to get it down to that level and to model what you do need to do. So I think that's one of the real keys here, and it's true even in the WUI. I've tried with my fire district clients to keep us a little bit out of the are we in favor of housing or not fight, because we are single purpose districts. We're there to prevent and suppress fire, and I don't think it's in the interest of the fire districts to get into what is a much broader political fight. But what we do think is critical is, if you're gonna build in the WUI, and we're looking at packages of things that need to happen with respect to width of roads, with respect to fire hardening of buildings. There's a lot that can be done to address fire risk with fuel breaks, et cetera. But there are also a lot of impediments to doing that, and so we need to clear away these impediments if we're going to be building in fire-prone areas.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to wrap up here because I want to conclude on that kind of amalgamation of issues. It speaks to the complexity of the circumstances and policy choices we make in California, and it speaks to some of the root evolution of RPLG and why you ended up opening other divisions and taking multiple angles to solve big problems for local government agencies, rooted in your career and experience in the city attorney's office. So I think it's kind of a great example of that. John, how do people learn more about the firm?
Well, we have a website, and the website is, has a lot of information about the firm. You can also obviously contact, any of our lawyers, including me. We're easily found on the website, and we love to talk about what we do. People shouldn't feel constrained to call us only with business. Again, I mean, we take it seriously when I say, we love to talk to people about what problems they're facing and maybe spitball some ideas, and maybe they work, maybe they don't. But that's the kind of thing we like to do. We like, the tough problems, and we are very, very open to, conversations. We're also obviously at most of the conferences, and happy to talk there as well. We're at CalPELRA, we're at League. This year at League, we're speaking on fire, some of the things we've just been talking about.
Very good.
And we're at pretty much all of the sectors of League as well. So yeah, we look forward to talking with people. We're very interested, as I say, in collaborating with folks, and people should feel free to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I got a problem," and not worry that we're going to be charging you.
And just to be clear, that URL for the website is Renne Public Law Group. That's RENNE publiclawgroup.com is the domain to go after. And I would assume, John, equally to your point earlier about always looking for new talent, if people want to call you up and have a chat about joining the law firm, they should equally go to the website and reach out, correct?
Absolutely, yes. We would really welcome that. We need help.
You need help. Local government needs help. So I appreciate the mentality.
I sometimes joke that the tagline of the firm should be "Local government needs a friend."
I think my city manager friends would certainly agree with that statement. And that's today's report. My thanks to John for joining us. From the whole PublicCEO team and myself, Ryder Todd Smith, thank you for your time. We hope you learned something new and inspiring that will help you in your public service. Remember, PublicCEO has a daily newsletter that is free to those who sign up at PublicCEO.com. If you have feedback, questions,
or guest suggestions for Public CEO Report, please email editor@publicceo.com.